It's my absolute pleasure to introduce our speaker. Dr. Justin Coluson brings an extraordinary background and experience to us this morning. His brief bio is in the program provided at your table, but suffice to say he is a presenter, academic, psychologist, consultant, and an advisor to many organisations of significance. I am thrilled that he has fitted us in this morning to present at this first of the Leadership Breakfast Series for 2017. And colleagues, would you please welcome Justin Coluson.
Well, that was such a warm welcome for such an early start. Thanks for being awake. Sleep is not overrated. It's not a luxury item, so I appreciate you sacrificing some sleep to be here this morning, and I hope that you get great value from my remarks. Let me start by introducing my family to you. My wife and I are the parents of 6 children. I normally get a different response to that, but I'm guessing because it's early in the morning, it took a little longer to compute. The screen did come up, did it not? Yep, okay, great. Now, if you look carefully at the screen, you'll note that those 6 children are all girls. That's what I typically get. I don't know why people laugh at me for that. I'm not sure that... Anyway, my wife and I are the parents of 6 daughters. For those of you who are asking in your mind those questions that you'd probably never ask aloud, yes, they are all from the same family. Yes, they were all intentionally conceived. No, we weren't trying for a boy. We just wanted to have a wonderful big family, and we're grateful for them. My dog is a boy, by the way, although he's not quite the boy he once was. If you know what I mean. So we have these wonderful 6 daughters. They range in age from my youngest, who is about to turn 3, through to my eldest, who will be 18 in just a couple of months. And we adore them. We think that they're just wonderful. Now, the more that I've studied over the years, the more I've come to recognise and discover that parenting presents powerful lessons in life and leadership. And today I'm going to share 3 of those with you. My baby girl is Emily Eden. This photo was taken when she was about 18 months old, so around about a year and a half ago. And around the same time that this photo was taken, one morning I was home, my wife was out exercising or doing something wonderful with her morning, and I heard Emily in her cot in her room making the kinds of noises that suggest that she's awake and needs some attention. And being the parent that little conversation with her and thanked her for calling me and giving me the opportunity to help her, I recognised that there was a great leadership lesson right there. For anyone who's a parent or a leader, so I've just been handed this shockingly unexpected treat. And I needed to work out how I was going to respond appropriately. If we have any kind of a stewardship, any kind of a responsibility for other people, it's almost guaranteed that we are going to be asked to hold things that we don't necessarily want to hold. Things are going to be placed into our possession that we don't necessarily want to have to deal with, and sometimes they're going to be far worse than what I was given by my little girl, without the smile. And when those things are given to us, what kind of a leader, what kind of a parent are we going to be? Are we going to be the kind of leader who starts metaphorically flinging crap all around the room, back at them? Or alternatively, are we going to be the kind of leader who says, oh, I'm so glad you gave me that, let me hold all of it, give it all to me, and sort of be the doormat? Or could there be another alternative? Well, obviously I'm here today because I believe that there is another alternative, and I believe that it's an important alternative. See, researchers have discovered that the people who make the very best leaders, the people who are literally Pied Pipers, the leaders that people want to follow, they have a set of characteristics, a list of attributes that they possess that make people feel almost compelled to follow them. That list, the data tells us specifically that that list of attributes includes things like being kind, people, if that makes sense. Early in my career, before I returned to school to pursue my psychology studies, I didn't go back to school till I was 27. For those of you who are worried about your Year 12 students who aren't doing so well, sometimes the ones who aren't doing well still can get PhDs and become doctors and live good lives. I barely finished high school. My parents were so worried about me. I just wanted to be a radio announcer. And I worked for some of the biggest radio stations in the country over the decade or so that I worked as a radio announcer. But in the early stages of my career, I was newly married. My wife and I had moved to Rockhampton, working in a radio station. And I'm just this 20-something kid who's just had a brand new baby. And our baby was quite sick. Our eldest daughter was quite a sickly baby. She had quite a lot of challenges. And as a result, she wasn't sleeping, and anyone who's experienced a baby who's not sleeping knows that we as adults don't get much sleep as well. It's exhausting. It's terrible. And as a result, my performance at work was slipping. The inevitable occurred, and I was summoned to the boss's office, where I sat down at the table and he stared at me for a moment and made a couple of comments before he said something along the lines of this. Now, bear in mind, I was waiting for him to start metaphorically flinging all of my unwanted output back at me. And he said, "Justin, things seem a little tough right now. I didn't offer anything in the way of excuses. I figured he probably knew enough about what was going on in my life for me not to need to explain myself. And then he added, to my surprise, "What can I do to help? It seems like you can do with it right now." This man who had the power to sack me, or at the very least to warn me of all the ways that my performance was jeopardizing my career, demand that I pick up my game, give me a warning, instead simply looked at me and said, "What can I do to help?" He offered to help me in the same way that any great leader might see somebody who's having a hard time, whether they're showing a willingness to be helped or not, and offer to help. You know, a child making a mess of things, whether aged 2 or 22. It's the same principle. Now, had my boss done what many leaders, parents, teachers do when somebody's giving them this garbage, this terrible output, had he started flinging it back at me, I wonder if you can imagine what my response might have been as his employee, whether I knew that I deserved it or not. My suspicion is that I would have left his office feeling misunderstood, feeling dejected, feeling like my boss doesn't care, and maybe even feeling a little bit passive-aggressive because he's just torn shreds off me. But instead, I walked out of Paul Sweeney's office willing to walk across hot coals for that man if he had asked me to. I'd been giving him substandard output, and he had simply said to me, "How can I help you?" It was a powerful lesson for me as a young man. Now, we'll wash our hands of this metaphor momentarily. Gee, I worked hard on that line. I thought that was better than you obviously did. But first, the key lesson, tough crowd, it is early, I'll give you that. The key lesson that we can draw from this as parents or leaders: the best parents, the best leaders, the best teachers, the best people in authority know that you demonstrate your power best by not demonstrating it at all. Let me say that one more time. We demonstrate our power best by not demonstrating it at all. The more we can leave our power dormant, the more power we actually have. The more we feel like we have to exercise our power and show everybody that we're the boss or the parent, the less authority, the less power we actually seem to have. It diminishes our power. We grow our influence the most, not by pushing people around or doing things to them, but by working with them and for them. Okay, the second life leadership that I want to share with you from parenting, life leadership lesson, that I want to share with you from parenting, is best exemplified by another story involving one of my children. Obviously, this time it involves my eldest daughter, Chanel, who at the time of this story was almost 17. So as my children have grown up, my wife Kylie and I have been really proactive in pre-arming them against what's coming. So when they're in grade 3, we've sat them down at the start of the year and said, "Guess what? You're going into grade 3, how exciting." And by the way, once you start grade 3, you're probably going to notice that some of the kids at school are going to start using a whole lot of words that we don't use at home. They'll start swearing. And then we'll ask them questions like, what do you think you might do if they do that? How do you think you might respond? How do you feel about it? How does it make you feel? What's a good decision that you can make around this? You're going into grade 5. You're going to find that a lot of the children that you're spending time with now are going to start to be exposed to things like pornography. They're going to start talking about sexual things a lot. How do you think that would make you feel? What do you think is the best way to respond to that? How can we help you with that? You're going into grade 7, alcohol. You're going into grade 8, sex. You're going into grade 9, other drugs of abuse and misuse. These are you're all in education, you know how early this stuff starts and what kids are getting up to. It doesn't mean that all of the kids are, but children will be exposed to this from those ages. And we've always taken the mindset that the sooner we can pre-arm our children forewarned is forearmed. They'll make safer, healthier decisions because we're not promoting any curiosity. We're actually talking them through it and helping them to make these safe and healthy decisions. In the workplace, we call it induction. Training, education, and we induct people, and the further along they go, the more training, induction, education we give them so that they're ready for the next lot of challenges. That's why we have staff development days, to induct and to train and to pre-arm. So we've done this with our children all the way through, and that means that by the time my daughter is 16, she's had about 10 years worth of these conversations with us. And not just that, but she's had 10 years of making up the rules with us. See, we haven't given her the rules, we've collaborated on the rules, we've worked out the rules together. And when she said, well, Dad, I don't think there's anything the matter with that, we've said, that's interesting. What might happen if maybe we can rethink the rule that there's nothing the matter with that? And we've guided the rule-making decision quite proactively, but we've let the children be part of that. The interesting thing about that is that as I drove my daughter to work this particular afternoon, she worked at the local chicken shop down the road. She was on her L's. I'm sitting in the passenger seat. She's driving. And I got this sense that she was really upset with me, but I couldn't think of anything that I'd done. So I was just giving her space. I wasn't saying anything until finally, when the pressure was oozing out of her, I said something along the lines of, Chanel, I may not be the most perceptive dad out there, but I get the sense that you're upset with me. Would I be right? And she looked at me, glared at me and said, maybe. And then she did that teenage girl eye roll. And I said, I've been racking my brains trying to think of what I might have done. And I still remember pulling up at the satellites opposite work. I remember sitting there waiting for an answer, and she stared at me. And she said to me, Dad, I don't like the rules. And my heart sank. I thought, oh no, here we go. After all these years, after all this effort, after all this time of learning how to be a parenting expert, she doesn't like the rules. I felt my heart just shudder. And then she continued, as I was gathering my thoughts and trying to respond and not knowing what to say, she carried on and she said this: "I don't like the rules at all much right now, Dad, but they're good rules." Thank you. It explains the why. I said to Annie, who's the office manager there, "Annie, I noticed that you have a new sign on the door over there." She said, "Oh, yes." I said, "Why did you change the sign?" "Nobody ever closed the door." I said, "Well, how's compliance now?" "It's through the roof. Everyone closes it." "Why do you think that is?" "I don't know. I think it's because I've explained why it's important that the door gets closed." Now, that's a really simple example. There's nothing particularly profound about it, but how often do we explain the why? How often do we go through that basic induction process? Whether it's with our children or with our staff, it's a principle that works. The second principle to support other people's autonomy, to support others' autonomy, is that we need to see the world through their eyes. We can't support them if we can't see how things are for them. When we don't see the world through their eyes, we often have a misconstrued view of how things are for other people and what they're really looking for, as this clever cartoon so clearly depicts. It's what I did for my 2-year-old. It's what I tried to do with my 16-year-old. It's what Paul Sweeney did for me. But unfortunately, when we're in this privileged position of power, remember what I said? We're supposed to have this list of attributes that get us there, but all too often, because we're busy or because we're distracted or because we're the leader and we just expect people will follow us, all too often we actually forget to see things through another person's eyes, or we just don't do it very well. We don't spend time building that foundation. We forget how hard it is to be a struggling child, or to be young, or to be experiencing unfulfilled ambition in the workplace, and we push our perspective way too hard. When people don't feel understood, they feel like we're controlling them. And when they feel like we're controlling them, they feel unsupported, and they feel like they want to push back. They don't feel like they have their autonomy. Don't forget, one of the core attributes of the best leaders was their empathy. We need to be able to see the world through another's eyes. The third principle only works if we've done the first two things well. They lay the foundation for encouraging collaboration, initiative, and problem solving. We work together on solving the problem wherever it's possible, and it's usually a lot more possible than we sometimes give it credit for. So we ask questions of our children, or we ask questions of our team like this: how can I help? Here's what I'm asking you to do, and here's why. I understand how things are for you now. We've spent some time exploring that. How can I help? Where can we go from here? What do you think? I think what do you think might be one of the most powerful things that we can ask our staff. If you were in my position, this is a good one. If you were in my position, what would you think was best? The reason that this is great is because while we've spent a lot of time trying to explain our position to them, this gives them an opportunity to put themselves into our shoes. If you were the leader, how would you deal with this? Because this is a tough one. Or, in times of conflict, how do we move past this? How do we get past this? And this is where we go from building a positive relationship, those first two steps, to creating a sense of autonomy, a sense of competence in the person that we're leading by actually deferring the leadership to them. We give control, we give influence, we give power to them. You can only do that if you have the power in the first place, but that's how it works. And what we're essentially saying is this: here's a ball, okay? And the ball represents the solution to our problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the ball on the ground at your feet, and I'm going to ask you to kick the ball to where you think it needs to go. So the ball's there, I stand back, I let you have a free kick. Now, if the person kicks the ball out of bounds, we say, hey, that's an idea, but guess what? You've kicked it out of bounds. These are the boundaries in which we're operating. I still want you to decide. So here's the ball again, kick it again. Let's see if we can keep it within the lines this time. So we keep on giving them autonomy, and when they make a poor decision, we don't say, oh, you idiot. We don't do it like that. We just say, oh, that went out of bounds. Here are the limits. Would you like to try again? That's how autonomy support works. We try to keep them within the limits, but give them as much choice as we can within those restraints, because we are operating within a particularly constrained system, especially in education. There are extraordinary limits that you don't have any say over. Okay, the fourth and final principle is this one: we need to minimize the use of control. Researchers have shown that in parenting, this approach has a tremendous impact. So if you are a parent of toddlers, does anyone have young children in the room? There's a handful of you? Okay, great. So if you're a parent of young children, you'll find that toddlers are going to be much more curious, they're going to explore more, and they're going to show more task persistence when we minimize the use of control and when we give them their autonomy. If we say to them, well, what else could you do with that? Would you like to keep playing with that? How about you show me what you can do? When we don't control, but instead we leave it up to them, they just do things better. Interestingly, on certain tasks, researchers have found that parents who are controlling when children are playing with a certain toy or doing a certain task, when those children are brought back into the lab 2 weeks later, the children show very little interest in participating in that task again. For parents who were not controlling to their toddlers, when those toddlers are brought back into the lab, those toddlers want to keep playing with the same thing that they were playing with last time because it was intrinsic for them. They weren't being controlled, they had their autonomy. For those of you who are parents of teenagers, or those of you who are dealing with teenagers, one of my favourite studies of the last couple of years comes out of Brigham Young University in the United States. A researcher called Professor Laura Walker did a study with several hundred teenagers, and she found that adolescents whose parents were autonomy supportive, who used these 4 principles, had teenagers who were much more engaged at school and likely to have high academic outcomes. Chose friends who were less likely to get in trouble. They weren't delinquent in any way. They were the kind of kids that you look at and say, now they're great kids. They were far less likely to experiment with alcohol or any other drugs of abuse or misuse. And they behaved more pro-socially. They were just kinder, nicer kids. As an opposite to that, the parents who were more controlling, who didn't explain the why, who didn't give their kids any say, who didn't try to understand how the world was for their kids, the parents who said, look, I'm the parent and I've got a spine and I'm going to use it, do as I say, not as I do. Those parents tended to have children who were much more likely to experiment with alcohol and other drugs. They were much more likely to do poorly at school, choose lousy friends and not be particularly kind or nice kids. Not saying they were bad kids, but you see, the more forceful we are, the more we push that unwanted behaviour underground. The kids don't feel like they can come to us, they can't talk to us. And it's the same with the teams that we lead. The principle, really simply, is that force creates resistance. The more we push, the more people push back. I think that the same principles apply in business as they do in parenting, and they apply in education as well. One of my favourite examples of this is a company called Zappos, or Zappos. I don't know how they say it in America, Zappos. So Zappos is known globally for creating this incredible culture. It's one of the most sought after businesses in the world that people want to work for. And for the last 2 or 3 years, they've been working on a new structure. They call it holacracy. H-O-L-A, holacracy. I don't think it has anything to do with Spaniards or speaking Spanish. It's just called a holacracy. And essentially, they're flattening the structure of the business. They're trying to remove the sense that people are in charge of other people. They're trying to get rid of the controlling aspects of the business. So what they do at Zappos is they've still got to have leaders, and those leaders communicate as clearly as possible what the vision is for the project or the vision is for the organisation. Once they've done that, the employees have a really clear why. And essentially then, they build their culture around that why or the value that they're bringing, and then they simply say, okay, how do you feel about that? Some staff say, I don't like it, to which the organisation says, that's wonderful, thanks for being honest with us. Here's a very generous payout package. And they actually pay people out in a significant way and encourage them to leave if they're not happy. They're really generous because they don't want people that don't fit the culture. Here's our why. If you don't like it, let's make it really easy for you to transition out. And then they say to those who stay, and by the way, most people want to stay because they love the culture, they say, okay, we see things from your perspective, you see things from ours, how are we going to do this? And then those leaders get out of the way. They stop talking, they start listening, and they allow their employees to be empowered to make decisions without controls and without structures in place that will get in the way. And if there is something in the way, some sort of control, they say, well, how can we remove that control? Now, obviously, we can't remove all controls. We live in a structured environment, we work in a structured environment, but the more we can remove, the more people feel free to do what they feel is going to work best for them. And by the way, the business magazines tell us that Zappos is pretty much the most innovative and exciting company to work for in the world at the moment. So that's the second principle. Let me review. Number one, we show our power best by not showing it at all. And number two, that's because force creates resistance. Okay, the third and final principle that I want to share with you this morning is best illustrated by an experience that I had with my 9-year-old daughter. We were at an indoor rock climbing centre. Love to go and do this. And I don't know if you've ever gone indoor rock climbing or done any rock climbing at all before, but if you're going to climb, you need to get hooked into the rope. You hook the carabiner to the harness and the rope goes up the top and it comes back down, and there's somebody standing behind you and they're hooked up to that rope as well, and they act as the belay. So as you're climbing, if you fall, they grab the rope, it goes through all of the mechanisms and it arrests your fall. You won't fall, you won't be hurt, you'll just stop, bang against the wall, grab onto the wall and start climbing again. So my little Annie was on the wall and she began to climb. And at this particular rock climbing centre, instead of me belaying, they had a handful of automatic belay machines. And the way this works is that you just hook the rope up to your to your harness, and as you climb, the rope retracts into the roof. There's a machine up there, and it's like a seatbelt. Bzzz. It doesn't pull you up, but as you climb, it just feels the pressure comes off and it goes into the roof. And when you get to the top of the wall, you let go. And instead of somebody below bringing you down, it senses that you've let go of the wall and it lowers you to the ground. Sounds simple, right? So Annie, my little 9-year-old, starts climbing. She gets to the top of the wall. And then she yells out, "Dad, what do I do?" Now, I'm a parenting expert. So I said, "Well, Annie, just let go of the wall." And she said, "I can't." And I said, "Oh, no, I know it's scary, but you can. Did you see that guy over there? He just did it 2 seconds ago. Watch, someone else is about to do it over there on that one." She watched a couple of people do it. Meanwhile, she's going on her elbows and her legs, and she's thinking, "I can't hang on," and she starts crying. She said, I can't. And I tried to be as empathic as I could. I tried to be as soft and kind as I could. And after 3 or 4 minutes of being soft and kind, she said, "I can't" again. And I said, "Annie, can't means don't want to. You can. Just jump." And she wouldn't. She was so scared. She just didn't want to let go. So I softened again, and I asked one of her sisters to climb up on the wall next to her on another auto belay. And when she got to the top, she let go, and Annie watched. And it took another few minutes of persuasion, and eventually, I don't actually know if her arms gave out or not, but she let go of the wall, and the machine caught her and dropped her to the ground. A few minutes later, I jumped onto a machine and climbed up. And when I got to the top, it was my turn to let go of the wall. And I discovered something interesting. I couldn't let go of the wall. I was petrified. I thought, what if it doesn't catch me? I mean, I know logically that it will. It's caught everybody else all day. It obviously works. But I couldn't let go of the wall. I was terrified. I climbed halfway back down the wall until I got to a point where I couldn't climb down any further. And I was stuck. So I climbed